Hello and welcome to my overly long and complex history of Tomas Kalnaki and Streetlight Manifesto. This video is a love letter to Mr. Kalnaki, Streetlight Manifesto, r/Streetlight Manifesto, the Friends of Streetlight Manifesto Facebook group, and everything in that sphere. I think it's important to note I will probably never do another video to this scale, depth, or even really style. I may or may not make an update someday. So, here's the whole history of Streetlight Manifesto, almost entirely unabridged. But before we begin, I would first like to particularly thank 4 individuals for motivating me to make this video. Firstly, and most importantly, my girlfriend, who kept listening to me talk about Streetlight to her for what has likely been 30 plus hours in the time we've been together. I love you, my dear. Secondly, user/NoSurprises97. I'm going to speak directly to you. If it wasn't for you starting this project on your own, I would have never picked up on to complete my own, and the video you are now watching is dedicated to you. Thirdly, user Bongo50. We have never spoken directly, but you made the Streetlight Manifesto wiki, which has not only become my personal obsessive project to fill with billions of useless facts, but also has become my proto-script where I write out all the facts that I'm going to say here. Lastly, Tomas Kalnaki. It was inevitable I was going to thank you. Your music has changed my life, and has become one of the most stable and reliable things in it. It's always been there in good and in awful, so thank you. Special shout out, actually, Chris Thatcher. You are my inspiration for drumming, and you blow my mind every day I listen to anything you perform on. Anyways, this leads me to my next topic. I, personally, wrote almost everything on the Streetlight Manifesto wiki that is currently up as of the time of writing. I will be listing every page that I created or worked on, but to be clear, I am not plagiarizing it, as I wrote just about every bit of it myself. This video also is not a brief video. You can see that obviously. This video is going to go into everything, every tour, festival release, lineup change, and event. We'll also be using this timeline to go more in depth so that we can see where we are in the timeline, and to help visualize the band in a linear fashion. While we're here, there's one more thing. This video was originally meant to become one entire video, but because of the album delay, it will instead be released in parts, and then later, once the album has come out and I can discuss it, I will compile all these videos into one long-form video. So, where to begin on this endlessly lengthy and most probably meandering video? Well, I'd say Christmas Eve, 1980, in Czechoslovakia. On this day, in this country, Tomas Kalnaki would be born, and in the early years of his life would immigrate with his family to New Jersey, very likely in or around Casby. At a young age, he likely began playing piano and possibly writing music. He would end up begging his parents to switch to guitar, and around this time, he possibly wrote the ever-infamous Mrs. Buttersworth, a song so horrible it would follow Tomas for nearly 30 years. I jest. It's actually pretty decent, but we'll get there. Tomas also has an older brother, Achilles, and he would become important later in the story. From early childhood to GIMP, there isn't a whole lot to know. I believe the only real point to mention at this point is that a certain childhood friend of Tomas's would end up earning a song named after him down the line, but we'll get there as well. Tomas's father would also be the super for an apartment complex, and Tomas would come across a large collection of records, which would inform his music taste for the rest of his life. Let's just jump right to 1996, with Tomas's very first band, GIMP. GIMP would end up releasing one tape, which had 13 songs on it, 2 of which are particularly important. Firstly, the previously mentioned Mrs. Buttersworth Indestructible Bomb Shelter, and also the very first iteration of Super Nothing. As for Mrs. Buttersworth, the song would become an ever-running joke for fans to ask Tomas to play. This song still gets comments begging for it, and I doubt it ever will truly stop soon. Super Nothing is also particularly noteworthy because it is featured on 3 out of 4 main Tomas projects. This particular version is much slower and features his brother, Achilles, on violin for the song. It's a particularly beautiful rendition, and despite its nature as a parody of depressing and self-loathing songs, it carries lots of emotional weight. The tape for GIMP's Smiles from a Cavity also features art done by 15-year-old Tomas for each track as a representation for all the songs. They would only produce one tape, and as far as I can tell, they never played live anywhere, though that may not be particularly true. Tomas wrote all of the songs on this tape except for the cover of One Tin Soldier. Also in this band was bassist Jason Sharon-Given and drummer Chris Greer. They would seemingly end things with GIMP well and would instead move on to bigger and brighter things. Also in 1996, Tomas, Jason, and Chris would found a new band. You may know them. That band would of course be Catch-22. They would recruit trumpet player Kevin Gunther, who apparently was working at a local record shop when they met him, saxophone player Ryan Eldred, and trombone player, you know him, you love him, Todd. Wait, who the fuck is Todd? Well, as far as I could tell, we're really not sure. He was only in the band for a short time. He featured on the band's very first release and only demo tape, Rules of the Game. His last name might be C-Man, but I can't vouch for that. Rules of the Game would be released in 1997 and would feature the founding six-piece and would have 7 tracks on the tape. 5 of these would later feature on another, much more famous release. One of particular note is a demo version of a much more recognizable version of Super Nothing. This demo has a much higher energy and ska-punk sound compared to the GIMP version of the song. This demo also has another song dedicated to Norm, most likely the same person referenced in the Searching for Norman Underwood song by GIMP. He was likely a friend gone. What this means is dubious at best, however. This demo also has the song I'm Better Than You, which Streetlight Manifesto would seem to play relatively frequently in their early years, but would never feature on any release of any sort. The band would sell out all 2,000 copies of this tape that they had produced. Around this time as well, they would begin to play live. The frequency is unclear, like most things at the time before and around Casby nights, but we do know of at least a few occasions where Catch-22 would play live with Tomas as their lead. Notably, they would demo, at the very least, Here's to Life, or a very early version of it. And the horn section from Ungrateful, which Tomas would not use for 15 or 16 years after. How much was written and debuted at this time is not known, but we do know that Here's to Life was most likely finished and written for Catch-22 originally, as Tomas would explain in the A Call to Arms liner notes. At some time after the Rules of the Game demo, the ever-famous Todd would leave the band and would be replaced by the first other Streetlight Manifesto member in this story. One Mr. Jamie Egan would join the band to fill in for Theodore. Jamie would be a part of Catch-22 for a time and would eventually later return in 2019. His son would also become a touring Catch-22 member in 2024. But this isn't a Catch video. Jason Sharon-Given would also lead the band in this time period and would be replaced with another eventual member of Streetlight Manifesto, Josh Ansley. With the lineup of Kalnaki, Gunther, Eldred, Egan, Ansley, and Greer, they would produce a cult classic ska-punk album. On March 24th, 1998, the album Casby Nights would be released. Casby Nights was the first and only album that featured Tomas Kalnaki as the lead vocalist, writer, and guitarist. This album would feature 14 songs and was roughly 46 minutes long. Remember that childhood friend I mentioned? Well, predictably, that friend was Sergio. Sergio is the namesake of the first track of Casby Nights, Dear Sergio. Tomas would state that he was somebody he grew up with, but would lose contact with when he moved, and despite seeing Sergio a few years later, he didn't recognize him. This album features a lot of themes of isolation and loneliness, which is something that any high schooler can relate to. It also features a version of Super Nothing, which is pretty similar to the demo version, though obviously more polished. This album also features a song about a girl that Tomas would have a crush on, that being obviously Christina, namesake of Christina She Don't Know I Exist. Christina would later become aware of the song at some point, and would even remind the band on Twitter of the 15th year anniversary of the song. Christina is a news anchor now. She's met a lot of famous people, and ironically, Tomas, to some extent, would be one that she never really did. This album features a much more consistent sound than later albums that Tomas would work on, but still had major variation, as can be seen with Riding the Fourth Wave being completely instrumental, and As the Footsteps Die Out Forever being a very somber song in comparison to the rest of the tracks. 1234 1234 also features a section where each member of the band thanks the people they'd like to thank, as well as the band thanking everybody collectively. Likely the last thing that would be recorded on the album. After this banger of an album would come out, bassist Josh Ansley would leave the band, but don't you worry, he'll be back in our story very shortly. Pat Calpin would briefly cover his part on the bass, but when Tomas would leave the band to focus on his education at the University of Savannah, and this would be pretty much the end of Catch-22 as far as this video goes. Pat Calpin would take over guitar, and Jeff Davidson would cover the vocals. Jeff Davidson, despite the rumored beef between Streetlight and Catch, will actually make a few appearances later on, but more on that later. So, where do we go from 1998? Well, to be honest, there isn't much to say until 2001, where we get the debut of everybody's favorite punk rock orchestra, Botar. On October 1st, 2001, Botar, Bandits of the Acoustic Revolution, would release their first EP, A Call to Arms, which would feature 5 tracks containing 4 individual songs and 3 originals. But before we talk about that, we need to discuss the Bandits just a little bit. It's hard to piece together a lot of what the Bandits were doing before October 1st, but we do know one thing. They do have a website. They still do. But this website predates A Call to Arms by about 3 months at the very least. The website is bare bones, even more so than the 2003 iteration of the Streetlight website, which we'll also get to. The website only has a few categories. They have news, which we cannot access. They have a manifesto, which is different from the one in A Call to Arms, which we'll also talk about. The manifesto section also has all of the members in the band. They have a downloads section with a small snippet of Here's to Life. This section as well also says that the album will come out in August, which it didn't. But here's the snippet of Here's to Life from the website. I think it's worth talking about with this recording that this is actually a different recording than we would get on A Call to Arms. Because the lyrics are at slightly different times and there's very small instrumentation changes, but also, right where the verse comes in, instead there's an instrumental section. Just a small little note, but this is actually different. They have a newsletter, which is just a link to their mailing list. They have a classified section, which is basically just asking people who play instruments to join their band and to email them with what instrument they play. It's also got this cool little art. They have a contact section, which I believe has a link to Thomas's at the time email. They have a comrades section, which I cannot access. And they also have a risk section, which links to the Risk Group website, though I can't see what's on the website, and I don't think there ever was anything really on the website. Before we leave the website, let me read the manifesto out. Bandits of the Acoustic Revolution is not a band. In fact, most of the musicians that donated their respective skills to help realize the first release never even met one another. This fact, in and of itself, should be sufficient to silence anyone attempting to sum us up with the four-letter B word. Botar is, however, an ongoing musical project, a collective at most, but it is not a band. The following is a shortened biography of the aforementioned group, minus all bells and whistles, emotion, and eventually logic, or a bad attempt at turning a personal anecdote into a musical mission statement that is eventually abandoned in the name of at least 6 hours worth of sleep. Someone, all names will be left out to protect the ignorant, was once overheard declaring to someone else, over the sound of a folk singer, who will also go unnamed, that all acoustic music was for sissies, or something to this effect. The overhearer of this declaration was a bit confused because he, having a soft spot for wooden instruments, never thought of himself as a sissy. Quite the contrary, or so he hoped. He liked to think of himself as the polar opposite of a sissy, whatever that may be. Webster fails to provide an antonym for us. Now don't get me wrong, I'll be the first to admit that there is plenty of hokey acoustic fluff out there, and maybe there is even enough to warrant an angst-ridden pre-teenager with a Limp Bizkit hoodie to chuck anything that's not plugged into the sissy pile. But damn it all, it's time we stirred things up a bit. Here's the deal. I'll make it quick because it's late and I want to go to sleep. About 15 people come on at one time to an impromptu home studio to record their parts to songs they've never heard before. They beat out their lines in 1 or 2 sittings, then it's all mixed together and put on a CD for your listening pleasure. Acoustic guitars, upright basses, drums, trumpets, trombones, saxes, French horns, violins, cellos, opera singers, punk rockers, folk, ska, rock, ethnic, energy, etc., etc., yada yada whatever. As long as it's not plugged in, it is what it is. 6 songs this time around. Next time a whole LP's worth. By the way, we put together a portable studio, and we love to travel. So if you are especially good at any instrument, we don't discriminate. We're looking for everything from bouzouki to xylophone to vocalist to anything that can be played in tune. We'd love to come to your country, state, city, and record you for a little musical experiment. More on this in the CD insert, or contact bandits@theriskgroup.com. Alright, I think that's it for now. Stay tuned for more info and stay safe, sissies. So, where do we go from 1998? Well, to be honest, there isn't much to say until 2001, when we get the debut of everybody's favorite punk rock orchestra, Botar. On October 1st, 2001, Botar, Bandits of the Acoustic Revolution, would release their first EP, A Call to Arms, which would feature 5 tracks containing 4 individual songs and 3 originals. A Call to Arms would have the very first studio version of Here's to Life, remember since Catch played it live sometime before or right after Casby Nights, as well as the intro to Here's to Life, which is This Is a Call to Arms, which, despite not being on the Streetlight Manifesto version, is played live to start the song off, without the lovely female lead. I'm not sure how well the boys could pull that off. It would also feature It's a Wonderful Life, which is a beautiful track that I absolutely love and wish got more love, and winner of World's Most Stupid Fucking Title Award. They provide the paint for the picture-perfect masterpiece you will paint on the inside of your eyelids. Great song. Horrible title. Also includes a new rendition of Dear Sergio with an additional verse. This EP is iconic. I wonder what they'll put out next. Bad news. Nothing. This is, however, the very first time that the liner notes of an album were used to communicate with fans. I personally love the liner notes, and I find that they shine a huge light on what goes on behind the curtain. So I'll be having them read out to you all. Before we get into individual tracks, we should start with the Acoustic Manifesto. That sounds kind of familiar.
The Bandits of the Acoustic Revolution were gathered to record this project A Call to Arms as a response to the state of music today. Though we have nothing against what dominates the airwaves recently, it was agreed that something new and interesting is due to ourselves as musicians. In parentheses, since most of our music is rarely used to play music of this style, however one chooses to classify it, end parentheses. As well as to those masses that grow weary of the pre-packaged posing we see all too often on television, whether it be fabricated hunk bands or equally contrived rap metal groups. So, a handful of musicians gathered at various times in an impromptu home studio to record their part on what you now hold in your hands. Only instruments of a purely acoustic nature used to prove the strengths of simplicity. We hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoy putting it together. The revolution will not be amplified. Bandits of the Acoustic Revolution.
Generally, this would seem to be a rebellion or revolution against the traditional standard form of a band and the expressed idea that music can and should push boundaries. But that sort of speaks for itself. Now, for the song notes, let's get into the very first track. This is a call to arms. Wait, hold your horses past me just a damn second. I completely forgot to read the explanation of why the liner notes exist. So, I'll be reading that to you all just real quick. You know how when somebody does something you really like, something that you really appreciate, you tell yourself that if I should ever get the opportunity to do something like that, I'd do it too. Well, about a decade ago, I bought my first compact disc, and the artist, who for the life of me eludes my memory as of this writing, did something interesting and dangerous. In the CD booklet, he wrote a brief description of each song on the album and a little bit about how the song came about. It struck me as interesting because it offered a bit of insight as to what the artist was feeling and or what he was currently going through in his life, which is rare and often welcome, at least by me, curious as I tend to be. On the other hand, it was potentially dangerous to the potency and effectiveness of the songs because it took away from the listener one of his or her most important tools, that of interpretation. Every time we hear a song or look at a piece of art, we extrapolate some sort of meaning to better break down what we are experiencing in our minds. Everyone's interpretation, therefore, is unique, as it's filtered through that one person's one-of-a-kind brain and cross-referenced against their personal, emotional, and psychological history. To describe in quite literal black-and-white terms what each song means can render it a lecture, a riddle posed just before the answer is revealed, giving the question no time to ponder the intricacies and subtle details of the riddle itself. That being said, fuck it. I liked that CD so much more knowing what went into those songs, and I got over the whole ruined surprise ending feeling. So, here are a few paragraphs on the songs you are now, hopefully, listening to on your stereo or whatnot.
Kind of a last-minute addition to Here's to Life that never really set right with the song as it is. Rachel does a very nice job with the vocal part. One of my ex-roommates used to ask me to play her part on the stereo before we went to bed each night. The full band makes its entrance. Bang! I want to juxtapose the softness and fragility of the sound to this point with some gut-wrenching noises, then bring it back to the soothing cello/guitar bit, only to do it again a couple more times. Then Dan does a little Barry thing, and in comes the first tune, a complicated number we like to call.
It makes sense why this section doesn't fit onto the Streetlight version. It's very different tonally to Streetlight, even with its slower, quiet sections. Regardless, I really like this intro, and I'm a big fan when they play it live. It gives a powerful impression. We also get the specific name of the female lead of the intro, that being Rachel Goldstein, who plays viola on the rest of the EP. Next, we have Here's to Life.
This is an old one, written a good 3 years ago. I'm just ecstatic the song finally made it onto tape. Metaphorically, of course. We're much too technological to advance to bother with tape, haha. I'd finished it while still with another group that I was running at the time, and somehow it wasn't crazy about how it sounded. I then decided a new type of band was necessary to bring a song like this to fruition, and the Bandits were born. As for the subject matter, yeesh! I guess it's on the heavier side of things. Why does it seem that all my favorite artists/writers/musicians decide to remove themselves from our world by violent means? After writing this song, I fortunately got to experience the ripple effect of suicide, and needless to say, the song took a new meaning and importance. When an individual takes his own life, he kills a lot more than himself. I think I've said more than I wanted on this subject, and so I'll move on. And for the fact nerds, I know Kama's death was never proved to be self-inflicted. Read the details and make your own conclusions. And I know Salger didn't commit suicide. He's the hero here. So many talented people can't grasp or even withstand the pressures of a public life following success. Salger, in my opinion, at least handled it so much more beautifully than the others that are mentioned. He simply disappeared from the light that seemed to hurt him more than help him. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Tomas explains that he originally wrote Here's to Life with his old band, Catch-22, but he didn't like the way it ended up sounding. He also explains that the song is about the pressure that artists withstand when they suddenly become popular. These artists are, as such, Camus, Hemingway, Van Gogh, Kurt Cobain, and Salinger. Salinger being the hero of the story because he became secluded but never took his life. He also explains that somebody he knew had committed suicide, and the themes of the song took on a new meaning to him. On top of this, while we're discussing the song, I would like to point out the lyric changes between the Botar and the Streetlight versions. From Botar, it was originally 3 went down, but only 2 of them come up again. The minimal is criminal, but less is a sin. The 3 went down, but only 2 of them come up again. I'm not gonna play if there ain't no way I'll win. And then it was changed with the Streetlight version to back off, but you're out on the street again. Don't you stop, but you know you couldn't swim. Back off, but you're on the street again. I'm not okay if there's no way to win. I just find that change to be pretty interesting, and there's also a minor change from, and every single soldier wasn't fired, some have quit, to, but I can't help agreeing with those who would not quit. I actually prefer the Botar line, but I think the Streetlight line fits better with the verse. Both are good. Some other changes to point out as well. Tomas doesn't sing the verse about Van Gogh in the original. I believe Natalia Ushank sings it. She will also be important later. There's also a longer instrumental section between Van Gogh and the final verse in the Botar version, as well as it ending with a piano dissonantly playing the melody of the song. I find that the Botar version of the song is underrated and absolutely excellent, and it carries strong emotional weight behind it. Next up is a hit from the old days, Dear Sergio.
Another oldie that I wasn't really happy with the first time around. It's cool the way the strings kind of weave in and out of the horns, making it so much more dynamic than the original. If only Sergio knew. By the way, someone asked if he's a real person, and the answer is yes. We more or less grew up together in Casby, New Jersey. Ah, the memories. We used to play his Commodore 64 in his closet of all places for hours. I moved away and just last year saw him in a computer store, working checkout. He didn't recognize me, so I didn't say anything.
Here we get confirmation that Sergio was indeed a real person that Tomas would write the song after, and that he was previously a friend of his. Apparently they would be friends growing up, but would lose context sometime after Tomas left. This version of the song also demonstrates Tomas's inability to leave a track beat, always rewriting and redoing. This version of the song has an additional verse, which would be used in future versions of the song from this point onwards. Next we have It's a Wonderful Life.
I'm not going to delve too deeply into what's going on in the world right now, although I could go on for quite some time about it. But it's interesting how this EP was intended to be pretty much a concept album about war/conflict, and then the next thing you know, it's not just a theoretical concept as it has a harsh reality. The song was written imagining it would be like missing a loved one while off at war. The main melody was written quite some time ago, and recently I wrote the song around that, as often is the case. Chris did an amazing job with the bass as usual, but I particularly like his work of the verses. Pete and Dan rock out in the solos, and delicious also, but it's what we've come to expect from them, no? And the final, the classic cha-cha-cha.
He explains that the melody of this song was written with Catch-22 or possibly even GIMP long ago. He also seems to have strong opinions about war and early 2000s politics, likely the US-Afghanistan war. This song is beautiful and I wish I could hear it more often. It's an amazing love song. Up last, the longest fucking song name ever in all of existence, they provide the paint for the picture-perfect masterpiece you will paint on the insides of your eyelids.
I know, I've caught some flack for the title already, but I liked it and it sort of just ended up like that. Originally an anti-war song that sort of evolved into a fight of the power type thing, as they usually do with my limited attention span. According to Gangville, it was interesting. Seeing old friends I used to play at shows with back in the day. The outtakes are pretty hilarious, maybe they'll appear as a bonus track somewhere. It seems the more I wrote in a minor key, the more the songs sound Russian. This isn't bad per se, just an observation. Stay tuned to the Bandits website for an animated film set to this song.
Firstly, fuck you, Tokay, for making me read that name twice. Secondly, two things to address here. The outtakes would never appear anywhere, and the animated film he hints at would never be mentioned again, though both things would have been interesting to see. Also interesting that he thinks the song has a Russian feeling to it. Editing me here again, I'm here to read you a little footnote at the bottom of the Notes of the Underground, because dumbass recording me completely forgot to get a clip of Tyler saying it. So here we go. Well, that's about all there's room for. We sincerely hope you enjoyed this CD, and hope you'll join us next time. A full length is due later in 2002. Until then, take care. So that was bullshit. A full length album from the Bandits would never happen. Because Toka is evil. Anyways, that was all. Editing me here one more time. I have to read you one more thing, because apparently when I wrote this script I was very stupid and did not realize just how much there was to talk about for Botar. So I'm here to talk about the Risk Group. What is the Risk Group? I'm glad you asked. Nobody really knows. Maybe it's like their own record label. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. But I'll read you it. And I hope you enjoy hearing me read this to you. The Risk Group was born of a need for a capable gathering of artists, musicians, and various other creative minds that seek the resources necessary to produce and distribute quality material of all types. There are countless unknown yet brilliant individuals/groups out there that cannot or will not compromise their views, beliefs, styles, or even the rights to their own work, whatever it may be. In order to get that work seen by and into the hands of potential supporters and like-minded people, until now, the organizations and individuals that control what is released to the general public on a larger scale have had just that, control. They decide what will be heard, what will be seen, and what will be accepted. The irony here is that more often than not, these people have little to do with the artistic content of what they are peddling. The Risk Group, although still in its infancy, exists to support and distribute all types of art and information with the focus on the creator. We push for the legal ownership of work by those that create it. No corporation should own the rights of a song. No businessman should be allowed to make artistic decisions. This is reserved strictly for the artist. This system would seem like common sense, but it's been the way it is now for so long that it's become relatively impossible for a single individual to rise up and step to the side. To step outside of the mainstream, outside of the way of the things as we've accepted them up till now. We are a loose gathering of independent-minded individuals that are working together in various degrees to avoid having to participate in a system that lures workers in with promises, exploits the workers, and then finally reaps the benefits of the work. If you're interested in learning more about the Risk Group, visit us on the World Wide Web. So, interestingly enough about that, the Risk Group website has nothing and never has had anything. This is kind of the only time that they've directly mentioned what the Risk Group is. It's always been there in the background, but it's not really a thing. Maybe it's the first version of Pentimento, sort of, but I really don't know outside of that. Anyways, goodbye. The booklet for this EP also has a section for upcoming projects, only one of which would ever truly release, that being The Casby Diaries, which would come out in 2003. But Sydney, I hear you say, no album named that would ever release. And yes, you are correct. But Everything Goes Numb sure would, and indeed it is the same album. Originally, it was meant to be the second part in a trilogy of albums related to Casby Nights. Though the name and connection to Casby Nights would be dropped shortly after the release of this EP, there's also an announcement for a full-length Botar record, and it would ask for any talented musicians who played any instrument to join up. In an interview in 2002, Tomas would state that he planned to travel globally and meet musicians to record with and come to them to record their part with his laptop and some microphones. How far he actually got with this is dubious at best. Next up was the project we know the least about, which is the punk rock band Man Bites Dog. Supposedly it was a punk rock band who was meant to have an album release, It's Go Time, but nothing was ever really heard of it. Then last we have the project to top all projects, not quite dead, but not quite fulfilled. Yes, that's right, 99 Songs of Revolution was announced. 99 Songs was meant to be a cover song project, which was meant to be originally a collection of 99 cover songs covered by Botar, but later morphed into a project between Streetlight having 2 albums, Botar having 2 albums, and 2 other unannounced associated bands having 2 each as well. This project got 1 single volume in 2010 by Streetlight, but nothing more has come of it since. They would ask that any talented musicians apply to Botar and that geography is of no consideration. They also mentioned Journeys, which could hint at plans for Botar tours in the future, but again, this would never happen as well. Before we move on, just who were the Bandits? Well, this EP lets us know. They were as such: Thomas Kalnaki on vocals and guitar, Mark Rendero on French horn, Marcy Q-Farida on cello, Nick Afilido on trumpet, Natalia Ushank on vocals, Chris Pazik on upright bass, Dan Ross on baritone and alto saxophone, Achilles Kalnaki, hey, remember him? On violin, Leighton Hayes on piano, Jamie Egan on trombone, Shane Thompson on congas and timbales, Rachel Goldstein on viola and also vocals, Pete Silva on tenor saxophone, Paul Lowendes on drums, and John Paul Jones also on trumpet. There were also a handful of people on gang vocals, but they weren't really important, except for 2, Josh Ansley and Jeff Davidson. Jeff Davidson would be the current lead vocalist of Catch-22 at the time. Says a lot about their bad blood at the time, yeah? This was a lot of people, so let me point out the important ones. Thomas, obviously. Natalia will be mentioned again. Chris will return as well, as Dan, Jamie, Pete, and Paul. Josh will also be mentioned later on as well. I know. You're probably tired of talking about the Bandits by now. But before we leave them, I would like to talk about their second iteration of their website, because it makes a lot of the things in their first much clearer. Firstly, we actually have a news section now, and there is a lot of info. So, we'll talk about the important bits after we go over the website. The manifesto section has been replaced by a bio section, and it simply says bio. The Acoustic Bandits don't need no stinking bio. It also has a little button to enlist. The enlistment is simply just, you must play an acoustic instrument, and you must be good at it. There's nothing else to talk about here. But there is still the photos. However, they're on the side here instead of the bottom, and it makes it much easier to see all of their beautiful faces. There is a propaganda section, which has samples from A Call to Arms. Here they are, if you're curious.
But then I gave up, I learned it doesn't really matter what I do, ain't enough to appease or to please all my well-meaning deeds seem to all go up in smoke. And every time I'm looking through these smoke-filled skies, I wonder what she's doing, why I wanted to die. Well, I passed on man on the corner in the city yesterday, singing yada yada yada, and tomorrow it'll end. When I never thought I'd live to see another sunny day, but I'm here and I fear I'll be here till the end. So watch your mouth, or you're gonna make a grave mistake. Hold your tongue, or you're gonna catch a bullet in the watch your mouth.
As well as some images that you can use as, your desktop background or the whatnot. There's also sections for videos and other, though these are not full of anything. The classified section is apparently actually classified as of now because I cannot access it. The server could not verify that you are authorized to access the document requested. Either you supplied the wrong credentials or your browser doesn't understand how to supply the credentials required. I don't quite know what that means, but it seemingly is truly confidential now. There is now a consume section, which takes you to a merchandise link where you can buy the A Call to Arms EP, which they're selling for $6. There is clothing, some very old, very classic Botar merch. You can get stickers, and you can also buy a poster. It also has an international mail order thing. They have an e-list section where you can subscribe and unsubscribe from their newsletter. It does actually load the Comrades section this time, and we can see that it is a link to the Streetlight Manifesto website, the Risk Group website, and the first unofficial Bandits of the Acoustic Revolution website, which we will talk about. There's a link for Risk, which just takes you to the Risk Group website, which, again, has nothing on it. The contact section has an email address that you can contact, a mailing address for the United States, and an international, or I guess Europe, mailing address in Prague to Achilles. Hey, remember him? The etc. section has two things on it. It has Street Team, which has nothing, and Press, which just sort of says that if you want to interview, send them an email. And there's nothing there either. So, what fascinating news does the Botar News section have for us? Well, a couple things. Tomas went on to a radio station, 95.1 in Georgia, to go on there and perform a song or two, not from the EP. I can't find this. I wish I could. If anybody out there happens to have it, I would love to hear it. Please email me. They also had a song, which, if you are familiar with a lot of Streetlight stuff, you may know it, One Mississippi. I don't particularly love it, but it's alright. Originally, it was supposed to end up on the Botar A Call to Arms EP, but they scrapped it, and instead we're going to leave it elsewhere, and they were going to put it up on the website again. This didn't happen. I don't think it ever got mixed, despite the fact that they said they were going to mix it. They consistently kept running out of A Call to Arms CDs, like over and over and over and over and over and over again. They did Thomas did another interview with a particular individual. We will talk about that here in a second. I believe that's really everything to talk about right now with this website, with this mailing list. But yeah, pretty cool. Also, a section from They Provide the Paint is taken from American Jesus, specifically this section. The Botar fan site seems pretty neat. I mean, there really just isn't anything to see in its present state because the Wayback Machine only goes to June 2002, and the earliest update that I can see on this page is June 2002. So, assumedly, it was active, and there was, a lot to post on it, but I just, I can't see it, unfortunately. It does seem like they worked directly, with Thomas. Probably, they were obviously a fan, but they were mentioned in the newsletter, and they seem to have a little bit of insider information when talking about Botar merch drops. So, I mean, yeah, it's neat. I wish the Wayback Machine went farther back, but it just doesn't, and this is all I can see. So, I'm going to be talking about an interview, specifically this interview. I'm going to go over the high notes. I mean, it's a 12-minute interview, so we're not going to watch the whole thing. But let's go over what's really important here. So firstly, this is an instance of Thomas specifically saying he doesn't like his music being called ska because he feels that it pigeonholes him too much. It's specifically a clash of classical and punk rock style. Thomas's mom told him that he needs to learn how to sing and stop yelling so much, which I think is very funny because he has obviously his toga career where he does no yelling and no screaming and just sings very, very softly. Squirrel nut zippers are a big influence. That's obvious. If you know a little bit about 99 songs, we'll get there though. He listens primarily like 80% to 50s and 60s music, like American 50s and 60s music. His favorite group is The Drifters. The next Botar album was meant to have a very heavy Eastern European folk sound, and it's a big inspiration. Specifically, Jaromir Nohovica. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. The new album was meant to sound very different. There was meant to be live shows for Botar. Again, the traveling around to record musicians and instruments part, he talks about that. A Call to Arms was recorded in Thomas's basement, so that's interesting. Musicians on the next record were meant to have more of an input on the songwriting. Electronic instruments aren't necessarily excluded if they're extremely unique, like the theremin. Lots of parts of A Call to Arms were scrapped because they didn't fit or were too long for the EP. The third Botar release was going to be a double album and be recorded with a full orchestra and contain no original music, which kind of sounds like Botar Live. One part of the double album is an hour-long song with no vocals. And Thomas's major in college is graphic design. So that's about all there is to talk about with this interview. I mean, you can watch it for yourself. It's an interesting interview. The audio quality is dog shit and terrible, but there's a lot to learn here. I know. You're here to hear about Streetlight Manifesto. Well, good news. We can finally talk about the band that's the subject of this video. In 2001, Thomas realized that the album he was writing didn't make sense for his primary band, that being Botar, and would need a separate project to fulfill it. He decided to make a separate band, Streetlight Manifesto, originally only meant to fulfill one single album and no plans to extend it into the future. This little piece of info would be posted on September 17th, 2001, with a journal page on the Streetlight Manifesto website. So let me read it out for you so that we can truly analyze and dissect this whole journal page, because there is a lot of info. Hello everyone. Okay, here we go. There are obviously no more secrets. FAQ, Streetlight. Streetlight is more or less a lost album. Upon getting many emails urging us to release it, we replied, when we build our own studio, we'll record it and send you a free private copy. We built a studio. Word spread like wildfire. That's fire. So as not to cause any conflict with other parties, since this was quickly ceasing to be a small private affair, we changed the name from the Casby Nights Project, a name born of necessity, to Streetlight Manifesto. We'll explain the name later. Oh yeah, free 2-song demo to be released from our site in the next few weeks. Full CD should be available in store in January/February of 2002. DVD, don't ask, it's a surprise, should be out summer/fall of 2002. Hopefully many other things to be released in the meantime. I think that's it for Streetlight Manifesto. FAQ, Acoustic Bandits. This is not ska or punk, just a warning. If you're looking for those two, see Streetlight or Man Bites Dog. Album, 5-song EP, due October 1st, probably a week late, knowing us. That's it for now. Go to CNN.com for some real news. Seriously, we're dealing with much bigger things in the world right now. For someone to tell me I'm a dick for not telling them what they want to know right now. People are dying. Focus on them. Okay, that's it for now. My wrist aches, insert clever joke here, and I just realized the drawing next to Streetlight FAQ number 3 looks like a man about to swallow a huge sperm. On that note, good night. I'll write again later. We honestly appreciate all the mail you guys are sending. It means the world to us. We're replying as fast as we can. Okay, good night. Thomas. P.S. I just realized the FAQs aren't really FAQs. Shit. So let's really talk about what was actually said here. So, with the little risk drawing we see here, we can actually get a little bit of an understanding of what risk is. It seems like risk is everything that Tomas is related to, sort of. I mean, that's the best that I can get. Also see that Casby Nights was supposed to be an animated series, which means that maybe the original Casby Nights and then what would become Everything Goes Numb, and then as well the third album would be an animated series, something like that. There is actually a little bit of animation to Everything Goes or Everything Went Numb, the song, but it is like 5 seconds long. But there's kind of a hint of truth in that. We can also see that, like I said, that Streetlight is a lost album, as it was said. They built their own studio. They had to change the name because a lot of people were realizing what was going on, that there was a new album. The demo was originally supposed to be a 2-song demo, and it was supposed to be released on their website in a few weeks, which is interesting because we know that the demo, like the actual demo, was not released until much later in 2002, and it wasn't even recorded until the summer of 2002, so I don't know what the fuck he's going on about here. There was actually a clip of Everything Goes Numb, or again, Everything Went Numb, the song, that was backwards, and you had to like reverse it to hear it on their website. I can't access it. I'm gonna dig and see if I can find it, but there was something, but I don't think that the EP was near done by the time he was talking about this. Full CD, I assume, as in Everything Goes Numb, released in January, February 2002. Well, he only missed that date by about 18 months or so that's not bad. There's supposedly a DVD that never came to fruition in any aspect, which is a shame. I think he did actually nail the release date for Botar, which is completely surprising because, you know, it's Botar. And then also this is right after 9/11, so they're talking about that. That's really all the stuff that there is to talk about with this. Another mention of Man Bites Dog. This was before they were mentioned in the A Call to Arms liner notes, but it's roughly about the same time. So this is probably around the same time that they were really talking about it. Man Bites Dog does have a website, but as far as I've ever read, there was just a flash animation forever. It was never anything else. I think there was an interview where they briefly talk about it, but I can't even see the flash animation. I'll show you guys, but there's just nothing for it, but another mention of it. Good news, we actually have to talk about another journal page Don't worry, this is the only other one. Good news, I do believe, upon actually reviewing this, that it does have the link to the reversed version of Everything Went Numb. So we'll listen to that. But let me read it out for you just real quick, and then we can listen to that and then dissect the journal page. What the dilly, people? I'm just here to tell you all that everything is proceeding according to the master plan. Get on the mailing list by clicking here for Acoustic Bandits or here for Streetlight Manifesto. Remember, only 3 things in life are certain: the kindness of strangers, the betrayal of those trusted, uncertainty. This website will self-destruct in 30 seconds or so. P.S. Here's a small, poor quality MP3 sample of a Streetlight tune. You have to play it backwards and twice as fast to hear it. And we're working our asses off over here. So we figure you should too. PSS. Don't believe everything you hear. With love, Satan. Viva la acoustic revolution. Really, the only thing to talk about here is that it's kind of a proof of life post that, things are actually happening, because it's okay that that's never certain. That should be number 4 there, that Tokay will cancel any project. That clip, that little sample, I think is interesting because it does ultimately sound a little different than the demo, which makes sense because this was recorded probably 6 months before the demo was ever recorded. So just interesting to compare and contrast there. Here's what it sounds like reversed. This is what it sounds like reversed at normal speed. Finally, this is what it sounds like reversed and at 2 times speed. What I think is most interesting about this clip is that they clearly recorded it at half the speed that they normally would, just to fuck with people, just to put this up and then be like, you have to reverse this and 2 times it, because it sounds like a fucking Nightcore remix with the vocals and the pitch of the horns, but it is the right speed. So clearly they obviously just did this to fuck with people, which I think is awesome and hilarious. To compare that, here is that section from the demo. We did it, guys. We can finally talk about the demo. The demo would release in June 2002. I don't know if that's actually true. I couldn't find a release date. It would feature the demo versions of 4 songs that would end up on Everything Goes Numb. These 4 songs would be Everything Went Numb, Point Counterpoint, The Saddest Song, and We Are the Few. These demos would be noticeably different to their studio album version, but before we get into the differences, let's get to the liner notes. To start off, Everything Went Numb.
Everything Went Numb was written over a few years' time. The skeleton of the song was born sometime in 1998 and then forgotten for some time while other interests were pursued. Also, the theme was beginning to wear, so this one remained largely unfinished until I discovered the Tales of a Sin City, which led to a head-first dive into old territory, smoky ears, trench coats, busted mugs, stuff like that. As usual, the lyrics were mostly gibberish until the last few days before recording, when they were written during a nice long drive from Tybee to the house I was living in at the time. I didn't want to stop the car and fuck up the vibe, so I kept singing what I had already down to myself over and over again, adding more each time until I could sing the entire thing from memory. When I pulled up to the house, and when I say pulled up to the house, I mean that literally despite the tiny parking lot on the side of the building. When I was lazy or in a rush or whatnot, I'd drive onto the sidewalk, over the garden, and right up the stairs that led into our living room, put her in park right next to there until someone complained. I ran straight up those stairs and grabbed the first piece of paper in sight to write down my nearly discovered booty. The subject matter is cliche to say the least, and deals with a down-on-his-luck protagonist who refers to crime to bail himself out of a seemingly hopeless situation. Like I said, I was taking in massive amounts of FM at the time. It cut me some slack. Violence comes to the crime, and the anti-hero arrives at the other cliche. How did they get to this point? Nothing groundbreaking, just a stab at noir songwriting. Hopefully a video will one day come to this bad boy so we can see that FM thing on the screen. We'll see.
So there's a lot to unpack here, without doubt. Firstly, likely the melody of the song was written with Catch-22, which pushes at least 2 songs from Everything Goes Numb back to Catch-22 days. Secondly, it really explains the whole Mystery Man aesthetic on the Streetlight Manifesto merchandise, the whole Sin City thing. There's a mention of the video for this song, which we looked at previously. There's nothing there. Up next we have Point Counterpoint.
Point Counterpoint is another example of about 3 or 4 songs coming together to make one. Most songs start with a solid part, a chorus, a chunk of verse, a horn melody, even a cool intro, whatever. This part is jotted down and memorized in hopes of soon fleshing that song out into a full composition. Counterpoint is an example of a chorusless verse teaming up with a verseless chorus and then being joined by a lonely and sad songless horn part. If I had been diligent, I could have milked the parts for 3 whole songs. Instead, I took the easy way out. Shock! Horror! And made one huge mutant song instead. The horn part is a doo-wop rip of a homage to the choppy sax parts of Louis Jordan et al. The verse was actually a Bell and Sebastian ripoff from my Wuss-Puss phase. I still love them. Wussiness prevails after all. It was originally meant to be sung by a boy and a girl, like a call and response thing. Girl, if there was something wrong, boy, I'd like to think I would, etc. You get the picture, all sappy and slow and whatnot. The counterpoint line is about the dynamics of argument and how despite being convinced you're right, the other person is just convinced that they're being right. Very dramatic. Sheesh. So then the chorus kicks in, everything is lost. It's from a song that was written in my Kiasby days, high school, and has the signature theme that I try so hard to avoid that I can't. Anyway, I remember deliberating whether or not to say motherfucking clock or TikTok clock. Eventually I went with my Sunday school instinct and said TikTok, because after all, and very ironically, the chorus is based loosely off a nursery rhyme. That one about the mockingbird that doesn't sing and whatnot. The TikTok clock sounds very nursery rhyme to me. Aw. How sweet. I know, but at least I kept snucking the word cock in there, keeping it real for the streets and all.
Let's break all this down again as well. Firstly, interesting to hear that Point Counterpoint was not written as one song, but instead as separate songs. Originally they were joined together. I honestly would never know. He also lists some inspirations which are relatively rare, and as always, they're not the inspirations you'd think. A call and response between male and female leads is a very interesting concept for the song originally, I think. I think conceptually it makes sense there that it's about argument, points and counterpoints and all that after all. This is another track that in some way was written back in the Catch-22 days. It's funny to hear that he was trying to decide between motherfucking and TikTok. Personally, I think he made the right choice, even as odd as it may sound. And yes, Thomas, you sure are keeping it real for the streets.
Next up is the saddest song, which happens to be the peppiest and fastest on the CD. Perfect sense, I know. Once again, this begins a slower than molasses acoustic guitar and piano song about death. That's practically Viagra for emo kids. So what can I do to ruin it for them? Make it a ska song. That's what. A fast one, with horns. Booyah! Someday we'll re-record all these songs in the original form and release them as a collection of Tori Amos covers. I like how Pete and Dan can't stop doodling in the end. The dueling saxes, those two.
Like I put on screen, thanks to Carcass8 for helping with this one. Some of the text is obscure as you can see and I can't read it. Anyways, this gives us a little insight about how he was writing these songs, all on piano and acoustic guitar, which would later make sense when he confirmed it with the interviews in his later Tokay solo project. Viagra for emo kids is a horrific term and I hate it, but also it's very funny.
And finally there's We Are the Few. Yet again a number of songs mashed into one long ass tube. The verse deal with a certain place I hold dear to my heart and how it feels to visit such a place when you're older and, well, not so innocent anymore. For the record, I no longer wish one of us would pass away. It was an excuse to see ghosts from the past that probably are best kept that way. In the past. Not ghosts. Never mind. The middle chunk, the calm before the storm part, was written during a period of time when little girls were being stolen from their homes and families by bad, bad people. It seems like this kind of horrible shit happens in waves or something, but then you realize it's always happening. It's just that it becomes a thing for the media to exploit for a while. Kind of like when they have those shark attack summers that are really just slow news periods so they exploit anything that happens regularly, etc. Anyway, seemed like every other day a little girl was being kidnapped, some of them turned up killed, and or worse, a few of them made it back home alive. It was disturbing to say the least. And keeping up with the case became a minor obsession. Hence some of the lyrics. The rest of the lyrics, chorus, etc. are in reference to the pride that comes by being a byproduct of being an underdog. Another popular, if not overused theme among these songs and those that came before them. And let's be honest, old dog, new tricks, etc. Anyways, this theme takes on many levels, the most obvious of which is the genre of music we play, especially in this day and age. It's a conscious decision to not appease the mainstream, but probably a more important one to not appease the genre you actually do reside in. Not sure if that makes any sense on paper, but I guess my point is don't rebel against the mainstream only to conform to the underground. That's why the band's not Streetlight ska-manifesto. Maybe next time we'll be more lucid. As usual, the sun will be rising soon. Until then, stay safe and be kind to one another. Know that the love you feel is for what we do. This is if that's not the case. If we're not, sorry for wasting your time. Felt by us, and hopefully the love we put into this will be felt by you.
There's quite a lot to unpack in this ramble. Firstly, the section of "And as the day fades" makes a lot of sense with the original lyrics of "Nobody answers when she calls in vain," with the understanding that it was written during a time of extensive kidnapping. Understanding this section makes the whole song a lot more emotional. It's really powerful and moving when you read that and hear it. The Everything Goes Numb version of the song would move away from this theme slightly, with the change to "Nobody answers when she calls his name," which I've always taken to be a mother calling for a son at war or a woman losing someone she loves. But instead, these original lyrics portray a mother losing a daughter to a monster. Truly soul-crushing. He also rambles on about rebelling, not just against what is typical, but also what classifies people who rebel. I think this message is at the heart of a lot of punk that many people unfamiliar with the genre miss. You're not rebelling to be different. You're rebelling to be your own person. And you can really feel the love in these songs. As rough and incomplete as they may feel to the studio versions, they're still beautiful and well made. Along with these notes, there's also a credits list and a little note at the bottom.
This EP was recorded in the summer of 2002 in a basement in New Jersey and a bedroom in Georgia. This is essentially a demon for what was to be known and become the band that is now known as Streetlight Manifesto. Enjoy and take care.
This is actually very interesting because I've read that this came out on June 1st, 2002, but that almost certainly cannot be true if it was simply recorded in the summer of 2002. Regardless, it's a great demo for a fantastic band, and comparing these songs to their studio versions is endlessly interesting. Speaking of comparing, let's observe some differences about each song. Everything Went Numb is up first. The demo version has a rougher saxophone intro, but it's the same, just with somewhat strange timing. The tone of the horns is also just extremely different. The biggest difference is that there is no build to the final chorus of the song in the demo version. It just jumps right in, and I believe the demo version may be slightly faster. All in all, the song is mostly similar and pretty complete in the demo, but I'm glad they added the additional build-up to the section. It really gets you hyped. Point Counterpoint comes up after. Super small change, I got to I've got, from the demo to the album, so technically the first word of the song is different. The intro is also a few seconds longer than the studio version, nothing major. The demo version ends right where they normally play Casby Nights live, and right before the best section of the song. It plays the bass section, and then before it can go into the whole section about dying without being able to live out the rest of your life, it abruptly ends. The demo version does not have the "fuck it, thank you, I love you all," which is objectively the most fun part of a Streetlight concert right next to "If you hate me so much, then stop singing my songs." As for Point Counterpoint, it leaves out an entire 2 minutes in the demo version. Those are the most fun 2 minutes. I'm glad they made those changes as well. Next we have the saddest song. The intro in the demo is marginally faster, I believe. He also doesn't yell "stop" right after the instrumental section going into the middle verse of the demo version. Years passed, but I see her face. 2, it's been years since I've seen her face. From the demo to the studio. The demo actually is a section that was cut. It's just a little horn section at the end where they only play a few notes, but it's completely cut from the Everything Goes Numb version. Since hearing that in the demo, I literally always expect it to be there, and it never is, and it throws me off. Lastly, but confusingly before on Everything Goes Numb, We Are the Few. The intro is, again, slightly shorter on the demo. In the demo version, there's no "I'm trying" section right before "Everybody's Going Down Tonight." It's just horn without vocals. Instead of the na-na-nas, he holds the "It's Not Your Fault" for quite some time. The song also runs a little longer on this version. Also the "in vain" versus "his name" difference that I mentioned earlier. Those are the major differences for each song. I'm sure there's quite a lot of small composition changes that I didn't quite notice, but largely they remain mostly the same with the exception of Point Counterpoint, who would be much longer on the studio version. So, who was the original cast of Streetlight Manifesto? Well, the demo tells us that. We have Tomas on guitar and vocals, obviously, Pete Sibilia on tenor saxophone, Dan Ross on baritone and alto saxophone, Josh Ansley on bass guitar, and Jamie Egan on trombone and trumpet. All would return from Botar. On drums we have Stuart Kamratz, or Karmatz. It's not clear. His name gets misspelled one way or another all the time. So either way, I'm sorry. Before we get into their first studio album, let's talk about the early website. I know. You want to talk about Everything Goes Numb, and we have to talk about another website. But I swear, It's pretty interesting again. Okay, well, let's look through it together then, shall we? For context, the earliest version of this iteration of the website that I can find is from 2003 and in August, so around the same time that Everything Goes Numb releases. So it's pretty similar time-wise to that. We have a good few links here. We have news, we have bio, we have shows, media, store, etc., links, risk, and a little email thing, a little mail thing. So let's explore them all one by one. Firstly, starting with news, we have only a few things in the news here. We can see just a bunch of nonsense from the 29th of January 2003. And then the 2nd of February 2003, it just says testing a bunch of times. On the 12th of May 2003, we have a little bit of an update about some stuff that's, happening with them. Their new album's coming out soon. Very exciting. And then the 16th of July, they posted some samples, apparently. And that is all that we can see for news as of right now. In the bio section, we can see all 6 current members, at the time current, of Streetlight Manifesto. And their bio is basically just a bio with Slayer replaced by Streetlight Manifesto. They just kind of throw in Everything Goes Numb right there. I don't know which album they're parodying or they're replacing in the Slayer bio, but it is just right there. It's just a Slayer bio. Like, all the albums are just Slayer albums. They have shows, which they have nothing on the schedule momentarily. They have a media section, which has, well, you can't see it, but it's audio, art, and video. The audio section has the demo, which 2002 super limited release. It's got the track listing. The art just says art a whole bunch of times, and the video just says video a whole bunch of times. The store just says store a whole bunch of times. And this is going to blow your mind. The etc. just says etc. a whole bunch of times. The website was currently, obviously, not done at the time. They have a links section, which links to the Acoustic Bandits website. They have a risk section, which once again links to the risk website, which again has nothing on it. And then this little mail has their email, where you can email them, and it has a post box where you can send things to their post box. I wouldn't send anything to that now, by the way. Don't do that, please. Okay, I lied. The website is not that interesting, but it will set the stage for when the website does get interesting, and that will be fun to talk about. So I'm sorry for deceiving you, and this is the last thing that's going into this episode right now. You made it all the way through. I don't know if anybody is going to make it this way through. I mean, what is it, an hour and 6? So, Jesus Christ. But good job if you did. Thanks for sticking around. I will be putting up more of this later. Not later as in tonight, but later as in probably in like a month. We'll do Everything Goes Numb and then the early touring years. We'll see where we go from there. But this was meant to be like a 30-minute thing. It turned out double that length. I'm seeming to think that no project related to Streetlight can be delivered on time and not be overly ambitious. So that might be on me. But thanks for watching and listening. Thanks for everybody who's helped me up to this point on the Streetlight subreddit. You've all been a great help. Seriously. Anybody I said I would credit for later things coming down the line, I will absolutely credit, of course. Credit to Carcass8 for those demo notes. Super helpful. Super nice. Yeah, I will be back in a month or so. Maybe not a month. I don't want to Tomas time myself and go completely off the rails with my release date. But hopefully in about a month I'll be back with another release. Until then, stay cool or something. I don't know how to end episodes. Later.